still have the voicemail saved on my old phone. I don't listen to it anymore. But I can't bring myself to delete it either. It was my son's voice the night before everything changed. He sounded fine, normal. He said he'd pick me up from the cardiologist on Thursday and maybe we'd grab lunch after. I remember standing in my kitchen, listening to that message, thinking, this is what it's supposed to feel like. An old man, a good son, a simple Thursday. That was 8 days before he forged my signature. I want to start further back, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. I grew up in Decatur, Illinois, the kind of town where nobody had much but everyone knew their neighbors. My father worked at the steadily corn processing plant for 31 years. He never complained about it once, not to me anyway. He used to say that a man who provides for his family has already done the most important thing. I believe that. I built my whole life around believing that. I married my wife Ellen in 1987. She was a third-grade teacher. Beautiful, patient, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and never made you feel small, even when you deserved it. We had 2 children. My daughter Renee came first. She's got her mother's heart entirely. Then 3 years later, our son. I'll call him by what he is now rather than what he was then, my son. I worked in commercial insurance for 34 years. Started as an adjuster straight out of college. Eventually made regional director for a mid-size firm out of Indianapolis. I traveled too much. I know that now. Missed some school plays, missed a few baseball seasons, worked late more nights than I should have. Ellen held the house together with both hands and never made me feel like a failure for it. When I retired at 63, she told me, now I get you back. She died 14 months later. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and brutal and completely without mercy. I don't talk about those months much. What I will say is that my son was there. He flew in from Phoenix, took leave from his job, sat with me at the hospital. I thought it meant something. I thought we'd turned a corner. That grief had opened something between us, the way it sometimes does with people. After the funeral, he started coming around more, calling more, asking about my plans, my finances, whether I'd thought about simplifying. I was 66 years old, sharp as I'd ever been, still doing my own taxes, still driving myself to every appointment. But I was grieving, and grief makes you want to believe that the people circling you are doing it out of love. He told me I should consolidate. Dad, you got money spread across 4 different accounts, 2 brokerages, the house. It's complicated. Let me help you get organized. I thought he was being practical. I thought he was being responsible. I thought God help me. I thought he was becoming his grandfather. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I almost talked myself out of it. I was going through the mail, physical mail, the kind that piles up when you're not paying attention. And I found a letter from my brokerage. A confirmation of account changes. Beneficiary updates, it said. I hadn't made any beneficiary updates at calls the brokerage. They told me the changes had been made by phone. With my account number, security questions answered correctly. Signature authorization on file. I asked them to read me the new beneficiary name. It was my son's wife. Not my son. Not Renee. His wife, a woman I'd met 6 times in 4 years, who called me sir, even at Christmas dinner and once at Thanksgiving. Asked me within earshot whether I'd looked into memory care facilities in the area because they were getting really nice these days. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after I hung up. I thought about whether I was overreacting. I thought about whether I'd simply forgotten. I'm 68, I told myself. Maybe I did authorize this and just don't remember. But I know myself, and I knew I hadn't. I called my daughter that evening. Renee lives in Columbus with her husband and their 2 kids. She's a physical therapist, practical and level-headed, not prone to dramatics. I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Dad, look at your will. I had a copy in a fireproof lockbox in my bedroom closet. I pulled it out and looked at it, and I knew immediately. The signature on the amendment page wasn't mine. It was close. Whoever had practiced it knew my handwriting. But the pressure was wrong. The loop on the G was wrong. I'd signed my name 68 years. I know what it looks like. My son had filed an amendment to my will 6 weeks prior. He'd also, I would later discover, submitted a power of attorney document to my bank, one I had never signed, naming himself as my financial agent. I closed the lockbox slowly and sat down on the edge of my bed in the dark. I didn't cry. I was past the point of crying. I didn't call him. I want to be clear about that because some people would say I should have confronted him first, given him a chance to explain. Maybe they're right, but something in me, Some instinct I'd spent 34 years in insurance developing, some sense for when someone is still mid-scheme, told me to be quiet, to watch, to learn everything I could before I made a single move. I called in everything I could before I made a single move. I called an attorney the next morning, a woman named Patricia, whom my late wife had used for her estate planning and whom I trusted completely. I told her everything. She was calm, professional, and very clear. Don't touch anything, she said. Don't call him, don't change anything yet, don't tip your hand, and bring me every document you can find. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered what I could. Bank statements, correspondence, a letter from the bank confirming the POA had been submitted, a second amendment to my will that I tracked down through the county recorder's office. He'd filed it as a corrective amendment, which is a real legal instrument, and it had slipped through because the notary hadn't verified identity carefully enough. Patricia hired a handwriting analyst. One appointment, 40 minutes, completely unambiguous result. Neither document bore my authentic signature. I had proof, real, documentable, legally actionable proof that my son had committed fraud. Not once, but across multiple institutions, across multiple months. While I was building that file, he called me twice a week like nothing had happened, asked how I was sleeping, told me his kids were doing well, mentioned he was thinking about coming to visit in the spring. I told him that sounded nice. Here is what I still can't fully explain: the dinner. 3 weeks into my quiet investigation, my son flew in, unannounced. He texted me the morning of his arrival. "Surprise, Dad. I'm in town. Let me take you to dinner tonight." I said yes. I sat across from him at a steakhouse on the north side of the city, and I watched him order a $22 cocktail and talk about real estate investment opportunities, and I thought, he doesn't know that I know. He was relaxed, expansive. He picked up the check without hesitation and tipped generously, the way people do when they're performing rather than just being generous. At one point, he leaned forward and said, "Dad, I've been thinking, what would you say to adding my name to the deed on the house, just as a precaution, so if anything ever happened to you, there's no delay?" I looked at him across the table and I said, "Let me think about it." He smiled. He had his mother's smile. She'd be devastated to know I'm writing that right now. I drove home alone and sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. The next morning, I called Patricia and told her to move. What happened over the following 3 weeks is mostly legal now, and I won't detail all of it. What I will say is this: Patricia is very good at her job. The forged POA was revoked and flagged with my bank, my brokerage, and my insurance carrier. New security protocols were placed on every account, no changes without in-person identity verification, and a 72-hour hold. The fraudulent will amendments were challenged and, with the handwriting analyst's report, set aside. A formal complaint was filed with the State Attorney General's office. I also updated my actual will, the real one, notarized in front of witnesses, with Patricia present. Renee is the sole beneficiary now, with a charitable trust for the rest. My son received a certified letter from Patricia's office on a Tuesday. I know this because she confirmed delivery. The letter informed him that the fraud had been discovered and documented, the criminal's referrals were being considered, and that all financial and legal instruments he had manipulated had been reversed. He called me 11 times that afternoon. I let them all go to voicemail. The 12th call, I picked up. He started talking fast, explaining, justifying, pivoting between, "It wasn't what it looks like, and I was only trying to protect you, and Mom would have wanted," and I waited until he ran out of words, which took a while. Then I said, "I know exactly what you did. I have documentation of all of it. I want you to know that your sister knows. I want you to know that my attorney knows. And I want you to know that I'm not angry anymore." He was quiet. "I'm just done," I said. "That's all. I'm just done." I hung up. I did not answer when he called back. My daughter drove up from Columbus that weekend. She brought her husband and the kids, and we sat on my back porch and ate grilled chicken, and the kids ran around in the yard and nobody talked about it much, which was exactly right. At one point, Renee put her hand over mine and said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I told her she had nothing to be sorry for. She said, "I know, I'm just sorry." That's the thing about good people. They apologize for things they didn't do because they wish they could have protected you from them. I've thought a lot about where I went wrong as a father. I've thought about the years I traveled for work, the dinners I missed, whether something I did or didn't do in 1994 is somehow responsible for who my son became. I think that's a natural thing to do, and I've decided to stop doing it. A man can give his children every advantage, and they will still make their own choices. That is both the gift and the terror of raising a person. My son was not destitute. He was not desperate in any way I was aware of. He had a good job, a house, a family. What he had was a particular kind of hunger, the kind that isn't about need, but about wanting more than what you earned, faster than you earned it. I've seen it in insurance fraud for 30 years. I just never expected to see it aimed at me. In March, I flew to Scottsdale to visit an old colleague of mine, a man I'd worked alongside for 15 years before he retired to Arizona with his wife. We sat on his patio in the evenings and drank decent bourbon and watched the sun go down behind the mountains. And I didn't have to explain much because he's the kind of friend who doesn't require a lot of explanation. One evening he asked me if I was going to be okay. I thought about the question honestly before I answered. Not the automatic "I'm fine" response I've been giving people for months, but actually thinking about it, whether I was going to be okay. "Yeah," I said. "I think I actually am." And I meant it. Which surprised me more than anything. I'm still in my house. The same house Ellen and I bought in 2001, the one she planted tulips in front of every spring. They came up again this April without any help from me, because that's what tulips do. They don't need much. They just come back. I thought about Ellen when I saw them. I thought about how she would have handled all of this with about a third of the suffering I put into it. I have not spoken to my son since that phone call. He sent a letter, handwritten, 3 pages, about 6 weeks after. I read it. I won't say what was in it because that's between him and me, and perhaps eventually between him and whatever accounting he believes in. What I will say is that I did not write back. Not because I'm hard, and not because I don't still love him in whatever diminished and complicated way a father loves a child who has done something like this. But because there are moments in a life where continuing to engage is not forgiveness, it's just giving someone another opportunity. I am 68 years old. I spent my whole life providing, protecting, showing up. I'm allowed to stop showing up for someone who tried to steal from me while I was grieving my wife. Renee called last Sunday. We talked for almost an hour about nothing in particular. Her youngest soccer tournament, a book she'd read, whether I was eating enough. Before she hung up, she said, "Dad, I love you." I said, "I know, sweetheart. I know you do. And that, after everything, is still enough. It is more than enough. It is, when I'm honest about it, everything." I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not a dramatic movie version kind of thinking. Not the moment where the music swells and everything becomes clear. Just the quiet, ordinary kind. The kind you do at 6 in the morning when the coffee's brewing and the house is still and you're not distracted enough to avoid it. What my son did didn't happen overnight. That's the part people don't want to sit with because it's uncomfortable. It means the signs were there and I missed them, or saw them and explained them away, or simply loved him too much to let myself understand what I was looking at. I think about the conversations where he steered things toward my finances, the comments his wife made about memory care facilities, the way he started calling more after Ellen died, which I read as grief and love, but which had another layer underneath I didn't want to see. There's a version of me that blames myself entirely. That version says, "You walked too much, you traveled too much, you were gone when he needed you to be present, and this is the result." I spent about 3 months living inside that version. It's a punishing place and I don't think it's entirely wrong, but I also don't think it's entirely right, because I know plenty of men who weren't perfect fathers and whose children didn't forge their signatures while they were standing at their wife's graveside. At some point, a person makes choices. My son made his. What I keep coming back to is this. Integrity isn't something you perform when people are watching. It's what you do when no one is watching, when the opportunity is right there and the person you'd be taking from is too broken by grief to notice. My son looked at me in the worst months of my life and saw an opening. That tells me everything about who he had become, and very little about who I am. The decision to document everything quietly, to work with Patricia, to not tip my hand before I was ready. That wasn't coldness. People have asked me if I feel bad about how it played out, about not giving him a chance to explain first. Honestly, no. Because a man who commits fraud across multiple institutions over multiple months isn't operating on impulse. He's operating on calculation. You don't meet calculation with a phone call. You meet it with documentation and a very good attorney. Renee asked me once if I thought he'd ever really understand what he did. I told her I didn't know and that I'd stopped making it my problem to solve. Some people spend decades waiting for the person who wronged them to arrive at understanding, and they lose years of their own life to that waiting. I decided I wasn't going to do that. I was going to tend to the people who had stayed honest. Renee, my old friends, myself, and let him arrive wherever he was going to arrive without me watching for it. Ellen used to say that people show you who they are, and your only real job is to believe them. She was smarter than me about most things. I'm getting better at believing what I see. The tulips came up again this spring. I didn't do anything to make that happen. They just came back, the way they always do. Because that's what strong roots do. They hold through the winter and they come back without being asked. I'm 68 years old and I'm still learning from flowers. I think that's probably fine.